I don't think it's a secret to anybody by now that Contrapoints is a liberal. She endorsed Joe Biden and, by extension, the Democratic establishment, and has long abandoned the kind of systematic social critique that she used to engage in before her transition and ascension to multi-million subscriber channel. Nowadays, Contra finds it more becoming of her to instead individualize social behavior and appeal to Christian morality. And what do I mean by this? Well, in this most recent drawn-out, hypnotically sleep-inducing, unfunny, sterile, unnecessarily long, and boring video by Contrapoints, she speaks a great deal of the phenomenon of envy, or how, when you get down to it, the reason why people feel discontent towards the ruling class is not because of a genuine sense of righteous indignation born from the toil, suffering, and exploitation unleashed upon the public by these vampires, but simply because they envy the wealthy and powerful. They just want what they don't have, so to speak. And that is a bad thing. Envy bad. Stop envying people. She gives a number of examples in her video of average workers supposedly envying the rich. One of these examples is her anecdote of Kim Kardashian, whom ignored CDC guidelines during a pandemic so that she and her friends could go throw a party, then proceeded to virtue signal about it on social media, about how fortunate they are, and then faced backlash for it.
Isn't the issue that when Kim tweeted this, most people were trapped in quarantine? We didn't get to have birthday parties. Some people couldn't even travel to visit their dying relatives. So watching Kim get to travel and celebrate her birthday like normal was painful. Pain at the good fortune of others is how Aristotle defined envy. And I think it's interesting that whenever social media erupts in outrage over luxury music festivals or Kim K's birthday party or Jamila Jamil's privileged pores, no one ever uses the word envy. It's like we're averting our eyes, avoiding confrontation with this dark aspect of our own psychology. So in this video, I want to take a long, hard look at envy. What is it? Where does it come from? And at worst, it's what the Bible calls coveting. He covets. Envy is something darker. It's not just wanting what someone has, it's begrudging them what they have. You might even hate the person you envy and want them to lose what they have, to be humiliated and destroyed, even if their downfall doesn't benefit you in any way.
Contra, the reason why people were mad is because Kim Kardashian was ignoring recommendations of government health officials and using her vast wealth and resources to bypass the quarantine just to go throw a party during a deadly pandemic that has killed millions of people. Everybody else is being required to shelter in place, but here Kim comes along skirting recommendations and CDC guidelines, putting people's lives in danger by hosting a social call attended by dozens of people during an ongoing public health crisis. People do not envy her because she has something that they want but can't have. It's because while everybody else is doing their part to make personal sacrifices in order to stop the spread of the virus, here comes Kim Kardashian completely ignoring it and then going on to virtue signal about it on social media. It's not envy to be mad at somebody for engaging in cynical acts that harm the group for their own personal gain, but apparently, according to Contrapoints, it is. Skipping ahead a bit, towards the latter half of the video, she compares incels to Marxists, saying that both are merely the politics of resentments, and that Marxian scientific social analysis of capitalist political economy is a kind of moaning, so to speak. Once again, she's taking a complex political issue and truncating it down to being flaws with the individual, as though there is something wrong with having a systematic understanding of the world or a systematic critique. This isn't the first time she's done this as well. In numerous other videos, such as her voting video, for example, she does this. She will cast out on the grievances of people who have genuine frustrations with the system as is, infantilize them, and act like thinking like this is a flaw or a shortcoming at an individual level for being too pie in the sky, too immature, too unrealistic, too unpragmatic, etc. And that this person doesn't actually have anything of value to say as a result. The video gets even worse when she conflates Marxism with inceldom in an attempt to discredit the former, saying that it's largely a cope for both groups' inability to effect change in the real world. Wanting systematic resolution to problems on the scale of what is needed is apparently too pie in the sky for Contra, and thus we are stuck with endless reformism, genuflecting to the Democrats, and simply waiting for them to pass crumbs onto us proles. And like that, Contra has completely swept centuries of class struggle under the rug and dismissed the far left as being no different than a bunch of people whining on the internet that they can't get a girlfriend. First off, this is a slanderous statement, so go fuck yourself. That's the first thing. And second, the idea that Marxists have no sway or influence in the real world is both A, not true, and B, circular reasoning. The third of the planet's population lived under communist regimes at one point. China is a country led by Marxists, and they're on the path to becoming the world's #1 superpower. But in the West, Marxists don't have any influence, apparently, and therefore they do not deserve our support. And they don't deserve our support because they don't have any influence, no matter how correct their ideas might be. It's the same bullshit for why none of these pragmatic leftists support third parties or alternative political organizations. Also, even in the first world, the idea that Marxists don't have political influence or haven't been influential is also bullshit. One would either have to be a textbook Philistine, or completely ignorant of the history to deny the important roles played by the likes of Webb Du Bois, Fred Hampton, William Z. Foster, Elizabeth Flynn, Emma Goldman, Bill Haywood, Jacob Coxey, John Swinton, Albert Parsons, and Gloria La Riva in their influence of the political discourse. Behind every reform is a threat of revolution. The New Deal of the 1930s didn't happen by accident. Communists and socialist orgs were rampantly busy organizing and engaging in labor actions. Hell, between the 1980s all the way up until the 1930s, there were a series of coal wars in the United States. And I mean that in the most literal sense of the term. In 1921, in Blair County, West Virginia, some 100,000 coal miners took up arms against the US government, and held up in siege in the mountains. And if you go back even further than that, during the Industrial Revolution of the mid-1800s, quite literal armed struggle was taking place in the streets as well. People were organized into mass organizations, and even took power and held power in certain points as well. You ever heard of the Paris Commune? The point is that the very real threat of revolution was in the air, and the legitimacy of the capitalist system had come into question at the time. The reason why we got reforms which were favorable to the workers back then, and in recent decades, is because of the people getting shot dead in the streets fighting the system, not because of the politicians signing off on that legislation with the intent to pacify the rebelling masses in the streets. And the reason why we aren't getting any significant reforms now is because the mainstream American left is primarily operating within the framework of a political party designed to recuperate our grievances and neutralize our efforts. Hence, every time lefties try to pull the Democratic Party left, it is in fact them, the lefties, who end up getting pulled right by the Democratic Party every single time. Just look at what happened to AOC and the Squad. Just look at what happened to Bernie Sanders. Despite all that bravado about being Democratic-Socialists in the political revolution, they ultimately genuflected to the Democrats in the end, and by extension the establishment and status quo because Orange Man bad. They ultimately went back on a bunch of their promises and didn't fight in the ways that they actually promised to fight. They basically fell in line with the Democratic Party most of the time. So you see, liberals, you don't wrestle concessions from the status quo by choosing which demagogues within its machinery are the ones oppressing you. You actually have to fight the machine. At another point during this video, Contrapoints used Marie Antoinette's execution during the French Revolution as yet another example of envy, and even identifies with the French Queen herself. Laughably so. First off, the King and Queen of France weren't executed because the masses were envious. On the contrary, during the French Revolution, they were actually allowed to stay king and queen, at first. It was when they repeatedly subverted the democratic process, abused the royal veto, hindering much-needed reforms from getting passed to the detriment of the public, ignoring the needs of the masses, and being blinded by their own hubris and greed, which is what got them killed in the end. And secondly, it's crazy how liberals will sit here and moralize about the deaths of monarchs through revolution throughout the centuries, as though their lives are worth more than others, as though some kind of tragedy is being committed when these people were directly responsible for the immiseration and oppression of millions. Yes, indeed, crocodile tears for poor Marie Antoinette, but not even a bat of the eye for the countless people who were destined to live wretched and short lives because of the likes of Marie Antoinette. And now for the most cringe part of the entire video. The part where Contra denigrates the efforts and achievements of revolutionaries of old, and once again, conflates popular grievance and oppression of the masses wrought by the ruling class as mere envy, and yet another push to individualize the problem once more. Then, in the most annoying part of this video, with respect to her comments on the French and October Revolution, this is what she had to say.
Not a political goal. There's been many revolutions in the last few centuries, and so far, 0 utopias. Resentment, envy, and hunger, for that matter, are not satiated by the downfall of the old regime. When the people have no bread, they eat the rich. And when the rich are gone, they eat each other. And because of the proximity effect, envy may actually increase after the revolution. You may actually be more envious of a favored comrade, a successful citoyen, oui, a kulak, than you ever were of the aristocrats. So envy turns paranoid and imaginative in revolutionary moments. It gets sublimated into morality, and the accusations start flying. That citizen is conspiring against the revolution. That peasant is hoarding grain. So the guillotine starts slicing thousands of heads off, the gulags fill up, or an authoritarian strongman takes over.
So I'm going to go ahead and ignore that absurd statement where she says revolutionary terror against reaction is yet another form of envy. Like, how the fuck do you even reach that far? But anyways, let's just address the main point. So during the Haitian Revolution, when the slaves of Haiti rose up and killed and rebelled against their masters, was the reason why they did that solely because they were envious of their rulers? Was it because their masters were free and they wanted to be free, so they rebelled? It's not because they were completely at the mercy of the French and were literal slaves? Or how about the French Revolution? How about the October Revolution? It wasn't because people were fucking starving, there was massive unemployment and inequality, or the middle class had become downwardly mobile, or the extreme destitution, and the previous social system was utterly failing to address the woes of the people, while the ruling class thrived through the exploitation and lived like literal god kings during a period where everyone else was just suffering. One last point. What is wrong with envying your oppressors? Why is it inherently a bad thing to want what other people have when you've barely got anything and they are rich off of your exploitation? What is it with this Christian moral fagging that Contra is doing right now? She isn't even making any arguments, just vague emotional appeals based on Christian morality. Righteous indignation against the crimes of the wealthy and powerful are actually just people being envious, apparently. And despite the fact that capitalism, a system that she upholds in practice, thrives off of people supposedly being competitive and desiring what others have, it's wrong to envy others, so therefore you shouldn't do it. So get back in line and stop complaining, you stupid troll. Again, she isn't actually making any arguments. This entire video is just one big appeal to emotion. Also, the idea that revolutions don't get anything productive done or are progressive is total bull. The October Revolution and ascension of the Soviets put Russia on the path to becoming an industrial superpower capable of feeding its people, providing everybody with guaranteed economic security, linearly growing wages and living standards, beating back the forces of reaction, going toe-to-toe with empire, and helping dozens of smaller colonized nations in their own national liberation struggle for decades. Every economic indicator of the note showcases a flatlined, stagnating path towards growth had Russia remained a monarchy. By the 1980s, the Russian Empire would still be a third world country were it not for the Socialist Revolution. And again, the Chinese Revolution has set China on the path to becoming the world's #1 superpower. Here in the coming decades, China will be the major player on the world stage, which sweeps and usurps the West. When the communist revolutions occurred, and the communists took power in China, Russia, North Korea, Eastern Europe, and Latin America, Cuba, and etc., they brought land reform, human services, they brought better wages, they brought universal suffrage for women and ethnic minorities. They did vast popular policies that massively helped a group of people that were previously toiling and destitute. And you're going to sit here and tell me that these revolutions didn't accomplish anything relevant? Yeah, no utopias have been achieved. It's almost like that's not the fucking point. Hell, could you imagine the world right now if feudal economic relations were never abolished in Europe, and the basis for legal equality had never been laid down? Do you have any idea how much our development as a species would have been retarded were this not the case? Contrapoints, like many big left YouTubers, otherwise known as BreadTube, not going to name any names of course, is gaslighting the left. These people provide an outlet for the growing left-wing sentiments online, while at the same time limiting the scope of discussion and terminating critical thought as to keep people from taking this rationale to its logical conclusion. Oh, you can't be anti-Democratic Party or you're not being pragmatic. We have a duty to stop Orange Man. You can't endorse or uphold successful revolutions or actual socialist projects. That makes you a tanky, which means you're like a Nazi. You can't support black liberation or decolonization, otherwise you're an ethnostater. These people narrow the range and scope of the discourse to such a massive degree with their rhetoric and content that they actively retard and hinder the development of an aware, organized, educated, class-conscious workers' movement that actually has a chance of taking and holding power. So make no mistake, people, there's a reason why these channels see so much promotion. Because despite the fact that they occasionally pay homage to leftist rhetoric or display a thin veneer of radicalism, they limit the scope of debate and the range of conversation, narrowing the Overton window, and conditioning people into an ideologically blinded little box, keeping them from going any further left than they are. And it is in this way that the likes of Contra, and BreadTube in general, despite saying they're anti-capitalist, saying they might be anti-imperialist, are actually part of the problem because of how much they dilute the message. You've probably noticed by now that many of my streams are missing. Well, that is because I'm taking this channel in a new direction. I'm going to be streaming a lot less from now on and instead prioritizing my efforts on more scripted content and releasing it on a week-by-week to bi-weekly basis. For those of you who enjoy my streams, however, fear not, they are not gone for good. I merely unlisted them. I will be including a list of links to all of the unlisted streams soon at a later date. Shout out to my Patreons, your gratuity is greatly appreciated. If you like this content, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe, and share with your neighbors on social media. And if you would like to help me in more substantial ways than that, then consider donating to my Patreon for as little as $2 per month. Alright guys, that's all I have to say for now. I hope it's been insightful, or at the very least entertaining, and I will see you guys next time.